Good morning, Kristen. How are you? Yeah, I had a feeling. Although shouldn't you be out in the waves? I love your pictures. Nancy, how are you? Danny, I cannot believe you got up for this. Um, I'm sorry about the West Coast people here. I just wanted to have one last conversation before noon, is all. Um, so welcome everybody. We have Boston. Hey Donna, Little Rock. Um, I'll tell you a story about Little Rock. I was in Little Rock and years ago, and I made a wish in a fountain in Little Rock for something I'd wanted for a very long time, and by God, it came true. The wish happened within about a month, so I have a very soft spot for Little Rock. Um, all right, Ithaca. Martin Luther King Jr. Day. By the way, that has an official name, which is a little frustrating to me because it's not, it's just his name, which I guess makes sense. But he was a minister and had a doctorate, so he is the Reverend Doctor. But all right, so people are coming in. We got enough people here. So I'm not going to talk about what's going on in Washington today, except in a very general way. I have just come from Washington, so I have some observations about it. But somebody asked a question the other day that I thought was actually kind of a good calming place to be on a day when a lot's going on, and I will address that. But this is not going to be this is happening, this is happening, this is happening. This is more sort of a general picture of American democracy. And the question that somebody asked was, why do inaugurations matter anyway? And I love that question because we don't think enough about that. At least I don't. We think about sort of the parades and the balls. And by the way, if you ever get a chance to see Mrs. Obama's inauguration ball gown, which is in the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C. It's spectacular, and anyway, you should go see those. They're fun, and the inauguration ball gowns. Anyway, we tend to focus on that and not why we do it and why it matters. And I think that's a really important thing in this moment, because you've heard people like President Biden talk a lot about how we have the peaceful transfer of power, and how that was interrupted on January 6th of 2021 and so on. But why does that matter? And I think this is really cool when you step back and look at it. Think about human governance in the European world before the United States of America. And if you think about monarchs, you couldn't disagree with the monarch. I mean, you had to agree with the king. And if you didn't, you were a traitor or a rebel, and you were lucky if you didn't end up drawn and quartered. I mean, it was a hanging offense at best if you turned against the king. So that does a lot to the people the king lives under, because they have to agree with whatever the king is doing, even if they don't agree with what the king is doing. But it's also really hard on the king, because if people dislike you, their only option is to kill you. And then for you to be for you to be replaced by somebody like you. And think about that really quite broadly, if you would, and the way governance still works. That one of the great innovations, and it didn't come from the colonists who lived in the United States, it actually came from thinkers in England. If you've heard the name Bolingbroke, this is one of the things he really did. To say, wait a minute, it is possible to love my country and even love my king, and yet disagree with what that king is doing. And the concept of a loyal opposition is huge in human governance, because what it says is you don't have to be loyal unto death to whomever is leading you at the moment. You need to be loyal to your country. And that idea that you can be part of a country and disagree with its leadership is a huge innovation in governance. Not only because, as I say, it does a number of things for the people, it also does a number of things for the governed. So what it does for the people is this: it gives you an outlet to believe and to act on your dislike of current policies. So you don't have to sit and grin and bear it until you finally snap and do something terrible. It says, I can work to change the king's policy, if that's who you're overseen by. And I have a shot at doing that. There is a system here by which I can disagree with the king. and perhaps change the way the king works. And this is where we get the idea of petitions, where you petition a monarch or a leader to say, hey, I really don't like this. Can you change this? Well, one of the innovations that the United States brought to the table, really somewhat by accident, was the idea that you could quite literally change who was in power. And they do this, as I say, somewhat by accident. And that's in part because the people who are putting officials into office in the United States of America live on the other side of the Atlantic. So it takes, at least a number of weeks and sometimes months for information to go back and forth. So the person who could be a king's officer in the US might have actually changed months before that person in the office in the colonies knew it. So the colonies get used to sort of switching back and forth between different people and recognizing that so long as they were doing their jobs, it didn't really matter whether they were the person who was supposed to be there or another person who was supposed to come in, because they could switch back and forth. And that itself is an interesting idea. But what we get out of that is this idea that you can have governance that is loyal to the country under a series of laws, but that you can switch who is in that position. And what that means for the loyal opposition in the United States under the idea of political parties is that you have the right and maybe the duty to work to change the government if you don't like it, if it is doing something you don't like. And this is why we have political parties. And one of the reasons that in the United States, it's been very hard traditionally, at least in the 20th and 21st centuries, to have a third political party, because the government has become complicated enough that when you elect a party, you want it to be able to cover everything from agricultural policy to railroads to foreign affairs, and that's hard for a startup party to do. You need to have a lot of infrastructure there for that to happen. But it gives you the ability to say, okay, I lost this time, but I can regroup and I can try again, and therefore it's worth me, leaving a nice note for my successor and going out and working to win again, and to trade those offices back and forth. And what that does for the country is it provides oversight so that the government is less corrupt than it can be, for example, under a single person or under a one-party state, because that opposition is always looking and always being like, wait a minute, you took $50 or $500 or whatever. So it provides oversight for the government, and it creates a stability around a body of work, a series of laws that both parties honor, because that's what they're trying to be in charge of, and they're not trying to disrupt that in the way that you would be if you had a single head that was just trying to hold on to everything. Now, that also does something else for the country, and that is that it provides a check on a strong man. And I've got an interview coming out that was why I was in Washington that is really interesting, because I think there's an intellectual problem in some of our foreign affairs. And I was able to ask someone about that. And it was interesting to me because one of the first things out of his mouth was, strong men always want more. And I would add to that and say, strong men always go crazy. And not in I'm not a doctor, I'm not going to say not or in a mental health way, but in a political way. And what I mean by that is, if you are the only person who can give orders, even if you start out being the most benevolent, fair-minded person in the world, being the only person in charge by definition is going to send you off into the fringes and rabbit holes, for the very reason that nobody is ever going to tell you no. They're only going to say, you're right, you're smart, you're the one who should be in charge, you're the one who knows what's going on. And if you think about your own life, we all need a reality check a lot of the time, or people to say, maybe that's not what's going on. Strong men don't get that. Leaders don't get that, because everybody says, yeah, you're the best thing since sliced bread. So that system of having the ability to switch back and forth protects the country from corruption. It also protects the country from a strong man who tends to get squirrely. And one of the things they do when they get squirrely is they try to get more. They try to get more money. They try to get more power, and they try to get more land. That's another big thing, because they think about their legacy and they think about making their country strong. And what they think about is expansion. And that is almost always a given. And you can look around the country, not the country, but well, that too, but the world right now, and see all the strongmen who are eyeing other people's country. And that's one of the things that the world order after World War II stopped, is it said, stop trying to grab people's land. If you do that, we're going to stand against you. And that's one of the things that is in danger of breaking down in this moment. But what I've just described is what helps the people in a country where you can switch power. But it also helps the leaders. It helps the leaders a lot. Because one of the reasons that strong men get squirrely is because they're terrified somebody's going to come knock them off, because they have just gotten rid of the system that says, yeah, I'm going to shake your hand and sign your desk and, maybe be mean to you behind your back, but I'm going to be all smiles in the front, because that means a leader can leave. And think about some of the strong men you can think about in your own lives. In the world right now. They're afraid to leave office. They can't leave office. And at the same time, they're afraid that somebody's going to knock them off. So this system of an inauguration, of shaking hands and walking away, is not just something that somebody like Biden talks about and says, oh, we have to have a peaceful transfer of power. It's a much bigger symbol of the system of government. It says, hey, it's okay to walk away. It says to the American people, yes, you have a chance to have your guy in there. But it also says to the leaders, it's okay to walk away, because nobody's going to be coming after you in the streets the way they have done even in our lifetimes in a number of countries. So that exchange, that system of change, is more than just symbolic. It's really about human structures, and they're very important human structures. And I think that's really important to remember in this moment. There's another major human structure that I think is at work right now in the country that we need to be aware of. And I think this one is really important. People ask me a lot about how I can stay sanguine about what's happening around us. And yes, listen, I get as upset as everybody else does. But there are much bigger patterns here that are unsustainable. It's a math problem, if you will. And, no matter how hard you try, you cannot make 2 + 2 = 7. And that's where we are with this other issue. And that is that because of the attempts on the part of the Republicans to skew the vote, which they've been doing since 1986, and I've talked about this, the voter suppression laws and the gerrymandering and the extraordinary flooding of our system with money after Citizens United in 2010, and the gutting of the Civil Rights Act in 2013 with Shelby v. Holder. All those things have meant that we are essentially in a period of minority rule. And that's, you hear that minority rule, you think, who cares, whatever, or maybe that's just a bad thing. There's a reason that's a bad thing, in a systemic way. And that is that if a minority rules the country in a way that is not reflective of what the people want, there's a disjunction there, a big disjunction. And people like me worry a lot about that, because a healthy society adjusts little by little to changes around them, because the world's always changing, and it adjusts little by little. And one of the things I always talk about is, imagine if when Ronald Reagan came in, he had not ripped the solar panels off the White House roof, and he in fact had listened to Jimmy Carter when he said we really need to get off of fossil fuels. Imagine what we would look like now. We would have made little adjustments for the last, 40 years, and we would be in a place now that everybody would be like, yeah, this is fine. We didn't do that. And so now we're looking at lurches, big changes in our society that make people uncomfortable. Even if they are good changes, people don't like change. That little bit of change all the time helps a society adjust to changes around it. And you can think of that in any number of different ways. Lots of theories, well, never mind. The problem where we are right now is we have a minority that is coming into power in the United States that does not reflect the will of the majority of the people. And that's a real problem. And it's a problem, obviously, for those of us who feel that our wishes are not being honored. But it's also a systemic problem for a government. Because how do you deal with that? How do you say to, according to the Wall Street Journal poll that came out earlier last week, or at the end of last week, 75% of Americans do not want the sweeping deportation of immigrants that Trump's people like Stephen Miller are promising. How do you say to 75% of the American people, we're going to do it anyway? Similarly, with reproductive rights, more than 65% of Americans want Roe v. Wade enshrined into law again. What do you say to them when you, in fact, put forward a national abortion ban? And you can go down the, housing policy, antitrust. You can go down this incredible list, and then you can also look at the moment we're in which, after running as somebody who was going to operate for the little guy, the incoming president has, of course, surrounded himself with the richest people in the world. How does a system deal with that? And the answer is it can try to deal with it by repressing a population. So you look at a place like Iran, not even recently, but a while back, where they just said, we don't care what you people want. We don't care about women's rights. We don't care about any of the things that you want in the 21st century. We are going to keep you back here in the past, and you can't move forward. And it's worked, sort of. I mean, it's worked in a systemic way. It's worked for a while, but you can see that there is this enormous pushback among the population. How long does it take before that population says, we're not going to play this game? And they do things like happened earlier this week when somebody assassinated two of the judges, two Iranian judges. You can do it that way, or you can say, hey, we got a problem. We really have a problem. We can't continue to try and force things down people's throats because they're not going to put up with it. What we need to do is we need to make those adjustments. And that is one of the things that I think it's going to be really important for Americans to really push for going forward, is to say, hey, 75% of us don't want this policy. More than 80% of us want common sense gun safety legislation. More than 80% of us. You cannot keep saying thoughts and prayers when children are being killed in their schools and expect us all to say, yeah, you're right. Because what it does is it delegitimizes that entire government. So that disjunction right now is, again, a really big systemic problem. And for those people who are like, they're all in power and they're all going to be in power forever, that's a hard problem to overcome as a leader. It really is. All right, so if you have, first of all, this issue of the need for two parties and the need to make sure not only that the people can have a shot at getting their own people in power, but also that leaders can leave safely. I mean, sometimes I think that the people trying to take power don't remember that that system is designed to protect the leaders as well as the people so they can walk away. And we have the problem of this disjunction where there are the leadership is increasingly out of sync with the American people. And that's going to have to be addressed. It is simply going to, unless the 80% of American people want to say, okay, we're happy with this, which I don't see happening. Americans are too ornery. That's a problem. And it's a systemic problem, and it's a systemic problem that must be fixed. And it's not going to be all fixed in the next 4 years, I promise you, or maybe not even the next 8, but we must do that. And what I mean by that is, as I've talked about before, the Electoral College, for example, never was able, of course, to take into account things like steel frame construction, which meant that we have these counties in the country. Los Angeles County is bigger than most of the states. We have this system which is really wedded to an earlier period, the Electoral College, and we also have the problem that beginning in 1800, Thomas Jefferson, one of the reasons I don't like Thomas Jefferson is he recognized that that the states could do winner take all in the Electoral College. And what that's done is it's badly skewed our system. And then in 1929, we took the Electoral College and capped the number of representatives in the House of Representatives. That meant that the Electoral College was deliberately skewed toward rural areas and continues to be. And you can say, oh, well, I don't care if that means my people win. But again, we are looking at a systemic problem in that case, because you have, for example, people who, it used to be that a congressional district was on, about 30,000 people. Now the average is over 700,000 people, and most people have no idea who their representatives even are. And that means it's not a representative system, and people no longer have faith in it. That's going to be one of the things we have to take care of. The Supreme Court and so on will be things that we have to take care of. Like I say, this isn't going to happen in the next 4 years, probably not in the next 8 years, but we must start those adjustments, or we will lose this system that enables us to change power in a concertedly peaceful way for both sides of it, both the people and the rulers. That's a really important ability there. So there are those two things that I'm looking at as these big systemic issues that have to be addressed. Now, I just thought of another one and I can't remember it. Maybe I'll come back to it. So in terms of where we are right now in this moment in the United States, and again, I'm going to look at this somewhat systemically, but I do think the Trump's moving of the inauguration inside 2 or 3 days ago is really important. And it's really important, and I would say not even symbolically, I would say it's important because of this particular moment. And what I mean by that is that, as I say, I've just come from Washington, and it looks like, aside from the joint inaugural committee, which has been putting up stuff since September 18th, the White House and the area and Pennsylvania Avenue and everything around it for a really long distance has these big barriers up. There were no food trucks. Washington was almost deserted, which was really bizarre if you were thinking that an inauguration was coming up. And I am suspicious that they ever intended to have a big outdoor event. I'm suspicious about that. I have obviously no inside information, but it just did not look like a place where an inauguration was going to happen. I would say there were fewer people there than there normally would be, significantly fewer, and probably because it's a long weekend and probably people got out of town and all that. But why does that matter? I think it matters, at least I think it matters, because aside from the symbolism that people are picking up and all that, I do not think, and I maintain this, I do not think President-elect Donald Trump is okay. I think that they are very deliberately keeping him from people seeing him. I think they're keeping him from having a lot of people around him. I think he blurts stuff out. I think they're worried about what he will say. And by they, I mean the people around him. We do not know who has his ear for the most of the time, but this recognition that, and this is again a guess, but I watch everything I can on him. He does not look like a man who is prepared for has the mental acuity to take over the leadership of the United States of America. So I'm wondering about him, and I could be absolutely wrong, but watch to see how often he's in public and how often he answers direct questions. In the next, going forward. He's remarkably invisible for somebody who is supposed to be the leader of the United States of America. Somebody sends out social media posts, but I think that that's somewhat suspicious. I think that this is one of the things about the American government is the president is supposed to be visible, supposed to be out there. And I don't think we're going to see a lot of that. And that raises another systemic problem. And that is who takes over from Trump if something should happen to him. And that's, I think, a really open question. So if you look, for example, at this moment, you may or may not have seen that Vivek Ramaswamy has essentially apparently been kicked off of the DOGE committee, the Department of Government Efficiency Committee, or whatever it's called, department. But it's not a department. It's not an official department, and it apparently is going to be sued the minute Trump comes into office, and been replaced by Elon Musk alone. It is not insignificant, I think, that Elon Musk cannot take over the presidency, even though obviously he is very close to Trump. Last night, Trump brought Musk on stage with him, and not focused on him as, his partner in this administration going forward. Musk cannot be president of the United States unless we amend the Constitution. Vivek Ramaswamy could have. And of course, they have sent him back to Ohio, where he says he wants to be the governor, which again is a systemic issue in the sense that you can't just say you get a governorship, not if we have any say in it. I thought that was really odd. But that question of who is going to take over this sort of one-man show in the future, should something, God forbid, happen to the president. And by the way, I mean that you will notice that I never talk about things that have happened to certain presidents in the past, because they never, ever create good things. That it is never a good direction to go. And that's something that people like me worry a lot about. But if something should happen to Trump, who takes over? And I thought it was really interesting in the last couple of weeks. If you look at the fact that Donald Trump tapped Marco Rubio, whom he doesn't like, to be Secretary of State, it looked to me pretty much like he did that so that he could put Lara Trump into that seat and into the Senate, which would give him a real leg up in the Senate, because the Trump faction doesn't actually command a lot of the senators. A lot of them go along with it, but they're not true MAGA. And Ron DeSantis didn't do that. He said he wouldn't do it, and he put one of his own people in there. Similarly, DeWine in Ohio did the same thing. He was replacing J.D. Vance not with a MAGA, but with somebody who was loyal to him. And I think that we're going to see real dissension within the Republican Party, because they don't have any clue what they're doing. And I'm not going to go into the whole TikTok thing today, which is somewhat complicated, but Trump was anti-TikTok until he got to be friends with the billionaire who's in charge of TikTok. Now he is saying he's going to bring back TikTok. I want to point out that that is now a law passed by a bipartisan majority of Congress that the Supreme Court has upheld. He doesn't have an option to whether or not he's going to support the TikTok law or not. I mean, he says he's going to change it with an executive order, but it's a law. In fact, unless he wants to come out of the box, simply breaking a law, which he could try. But this morning, Tom Cotton of Arkansas, a senator from Arkansas, went online and said, go ahead and try it. Go ahead and try it, TikTok, but you're going to get sued by everybody and his grandmother. I paraphrase, he didn't say it exactly that way. And what that says to me is that the Republicans don't know, as Buddy would say, if they're a foot or horseback. They're for some things, against some things, and their only North Star seems to be what Trump wants in that moment, because it changes, and then they jump along behind him. And I think what Trump wants in this moment is to be rich, not to go to jail. He's accomplished that, to be rich, and to have people who adulate him around him. And right now, the tech bros are delivering that, but that is not what people voted for. So it seems to me there is extraordinary instability in this incoming government, because it is not matched up with the people want and with what the people want. And it's not even matched up within itself. And that's not even talking about all the divisions I've talked about within the Republican Party. So there is a systemic issue there as well. That when people are frightened, as you should be, and I'll talk about that in a second, recognize that there is a tremendous amount of wiggle room right now in what's going forward in the Republican Party. And by wiggle room, I mean, like I said, I don't know if they're fish or fowl, or if they are a foot or horseback. They don't know what they're for or what they're against, and they wait minute by minute to see what Trump is going to do. But Trump himself is not mentally acute in this moment. At least it seems to me, as I'm trying to follow his policies. So I think that's another problem. And this is another major issue that I really think we need to pay attention to. And that is what Trump does is, and he does it so well, is he's a showman. He's a performer. That's what he does. And what he and his people have done is they have turned the United States of America into a reality show. And what that means is, in a reality show, if you think about it, nobody ever negotiates, nobody ever backs down, and things always escalate. And they do that to keep you watching, to make sure that you care, that you're invested in the next event, in the next crisis. And that quite literally, if you become addicted to it or come involved with it, it gives your brain hits of dopamine so that you can sit there and say, what's going to happen next? And it's an act. And it's really important to understand that it's an act. So think about during the campaign, they're eating the cats and dogs. There are Venezuelan gangs that have taken over Aurora, Colorado. I'm going to bring down the price of groceries on day one. I'm going to solve the Ukraine, the Russian invasion of Ukraine on day one. All this stuff that's gone. It just disappeared because that storyline did what it needed to do, and it dropped out. And you can already see this. Last night in his rally, Trump said, you're going to be so excited when you see what I do tomorrow. And those are teasers. I mean, think of them as advertising for your next, the next drop of your TV show. Ooh, wait and see what's going to happen to Amanda, so that you tune in. And you don't always have to actually deliver that. You just need to get eyeballs. And one of the things that he wants to do is to get eyeballs. And that's what the American people, at least the ones who voted for him, chose. They wanted that. They wanted their guy to win. This is sort of this professionalization of, professional wrestling in the American government. I want my guys to win. I want my professional wrestler to win against the other guy. And that, by the way, was the same setup as the Fox News channel early on. The idea that they would set up, a right-wing figure and somebody who was trying to defend liberal democracy, and then they would slam down that guy and it would give people a hit of dopamine. And it did. There's great literature on this. But that performative aspect of, tune in, is designed to exhaust people. It's designed to terrify people and to exhaust people. And you spend all your time running around going, oh my God, has he done this? Oh my God, has he done this? What's he saying when he's going to do this? And trying to figure it out. That is deliberate. It's a deliberate way in which strong men try and destabilize a population. And we remember this from the first term. Remember, the travel ban came in within, I think it was within a week of his taking the oath of office. And people were, as they should have been, were flying to airports to defend people who were literally on airplanes, and they were legal immigrants when they got on the plane, and they would be undocumented when they got off the plane. I mean, or not undocumented, they would be part of this travel ban when they got off the plane. I mean, it was a complete dumpster fire, and that was deliberate, so that we were all so uneasy that either we would be frightened for ourselves and stop talking about things, or we would say it's too much, everybody's corrupt, and back away. And that's deliberate. Also the idea of accusing your enemy of what you are planning to do. So you've heard again and again from the Trump camp that Biden weaponized the Department of Justice. I promise you, if he had weaponized the Department of Justice, Donald Trump would be in jail right now. They played so thoroughly by the book that it enabled the right-wing radicals on the Supreme Court to delay Trump's cases enough. Remember, his first case was supposed to go to trial in March of 2024. But they managed to run the clock out on everything, that Trump got away with never facing federal charges for both the retention of classified documents and inciting an insurrection. And you can read the latter of those two reports. It's incredibly damning. But they're going to do it. I mean, what they're saying is, we're going to accuse you of it so that when we do it, people say, oh, this is just the way things happen. This is just the way the government works and everybody is corrupt. They're not. Not everybody is corrupt. The government is us. The government is people you and me know. And you know what? None of us is perfect. And many of us make stupid mistakes. Some make real dumbass mistakes. And some people, even the ones you like, are corrupt. But most people are not. And when they go into political offices, they do it because they care about public service. And the ones who are corrupt in a healthy system get watched, and they get thrown out when they cross the line. And that's been, people always say, why are the Republicans so corrupt and the Democrats are not right now, with the exception of people like Robert Menendez? Because the Republicans have been like like hawks on the Democrats now for 40 years and culling out the bad guys, because there are bad guys there too. And the Republicans have one-party systems in states like Florida. How did Matt Gaetz get as far as he did? Because nobody tossed him out earlier, and he's not the only one in Florida who's profoundly corrupt. Ohio, don't even start me. Mississippi, these are states that are one-party states where corruption has been able to thrive systemically, like I say. So they're going to preemptively try to say, well, the Democrats did this, Biden did this, and that's just not true. This is a very much attempt to convince people of that everybody is corrupt. So you say, well, I don't care. And it's really important here that one of the key differences between Poland, which has regained its democracy after a strongman took it over recently, and Hungary, which has not, is that in Hungary people said, this is just the way things are. And in Poland, they said, this is not the way things are. This is how, we have to fight back against this. And you can see this playing out in South Korea right now as well. So they're going to try and do that, and they're going to try and be in your eyeballs all the freaking time. Do not let that happen. And I'm speaking now as a human being who has lived a long time, as well as an observer of American history. And that is kind of a no-brainer. If you are always reacting to somebody else, they're calling all the shots. You are living in their reality, even if you're fighting against it. Don't let that happen. And I'm not saying to ignore what's happening in the world at all, but you don't have to read the news the second you get out of bed and react to every moment. You can wait for things to settle down a little bit. So, for example, we know so much more about Donald Trump's meme coin today than we did when he brought it out 2 days ago, that I can write about it intelligently now. I don't have all the answers, because we don't know all the answers yet, but I waited until enough people had weighed in who knew about it that it makes some sense. Similarly, the TikTok thing. I can now talk about the TikTok thing, but when it first happened, I was like, wait, who am I following? What am I supposed to be doing? You don't have to do that. People like me will do that. You don't have to do that, because it's going to not only drive you bonkers, but it means that you don't get to call the shots in your own life, and you don't get to call the shots in the United States of America. And that's what we're going to need to do, all of us, from whatever party who wants to preserve American democracy, is to hold firm to those laws. Now, you may like TikTok, you may hate TikTok, you may have no opinion about TikTok, you may not even know what TikTok is, but what you do care about is that Congress passed a law, the Supreme Court upheld that law, and one man is threatening to throw it out. The answer to that is, listen, I can work to change that law. I can work to support that law. What I don't want to do is to give that control over our laws to this guy who has just announced he's going to do whatever he wants, and who, by the way, probably doesn't even understand at this point what he is saying, because he's, like I say, he's not in terribly good shape. We must always keep our eye on those broader systems of democracy. And what those broader systems of democracy are is that the framers set up a system which was designed to be fixed when it broke, by the way, which is something we have not been as good about as we should have been. They set up a system in which our representatives, the people in the House of Representatives, chosen by us, now that's been perverted in places like North Carolina and other states that gerrymander such that it doesn't matter when the Democrats win a majority. The Republicans still hold a supermajority because of the gerrymandering. But those representatives sitting in Congress make our laws, and they are supposed to make them with debate, and that debate in the House of Representatives, then over things like financial stuff, taxes, and so on, goes to the Senate, or vice versa. The Senate can't initiate anything having to do with revenue, but it can initiate other bills. And they talk about it, and they're supposed to argue, because the House of Representatives turns over every 2 years, so it's supposed to respond more directly to the people, and the Senate is supposed to turn over in full every 6 years, although they're the only body, and I haven't looked for about 10 years, but it used to be that the only body that turned over less than the U.S. Senate was the House of Lords. So they're supposed to turn over in full every 6 years so that they're slower, so that they don't react as fully to the people. And then once they have agreed on a law, it goes to the president, and the president turns over every 4 years in between those two, so that the president's supposed to be a little bit faster than the House, but slower than the Senate to accept new ideas. And the president either signs the law or vetoes the law, at which point it can go back to our representatives, who can either say, you're an idiot, we're going to pass it over your veto, or they can fix it so that the president says, okay, I can sign it at this point. If they come up with a law and people still don't like it, then it gets challenged in the courts, and ultimately it should end up before the Supreme Court of the United States, which should say whether or not that law adheres to the Constitution. Now, there are problems with our Supreme Court because it's been taken over by the radical right, but that's the way the system is supposed to work. And that's what we're going to have to be holding on to going forward, not going, oh, is he going to do this? Is he not going to do this? What is he threatening? Because that's his advertisement for you to keep your eyeballs on him. If you wait to see what he does and react to that, to reinforce our democracy, you're going to make your life a whole lot saner. So I would urge you to do that, and not to permit yourself to freak out based on his words, because he's going to say everything to keep you watching. If you watch what he does instead, and you say, hey, yeah, this is fine. I agree with the fact he's doing, funding vaccines. That's fine. That seems fine. That's fine. But if you disagree, that's when you speak up and say, no, this is not the way our system works. Now, one of the places we're going to be able to work on this going forward is within the states and the local governments. So, for example, I mentioned North Carolina a minute ago. If you are not paying attention to North Carolina, it's really important. And if you are here from North Carolina and listening to me, you need to speak up now. Like, turn me off and go speak up. Because what's happened in North Carolina, and I wrote about this the other day, is that by taking over a few key offices, primarily in the North Carolina State Supreme Court, the radical right in North Carolina has managed to carve up a purple state. It's divided about 50-50 in such a way that the Republicans run North Carolina. Until this last election, they had a supermajority so they could override the Democratic governor of the state. And it's worth looking at that, because the fact that the state elects Democratic governors in statewide elections says that the Democrats are actually quite popular in that state. So why do they have a Republican supermajority? Because they're cheating. How do you deal with that? You work at the state and the local level, and you say, this is not okay. I'm going to make sure that this state Supreme Court, where right now the radical right is trying to steal an election from the Democrat Allison Riggs, who won the election in November, and the guy who's challenging it is trying, first of all, to get thrown out 60,000 votes from people in North Carolina. Barring that, he's willing simply to throw out the votes from people overseas, and he's trying to get the state Supreme Court to do that. It is a 5-2 majority Republican court. They recognize that this would be stealing an election, and they've been trying to waffle around it. But it's a real issue, and you need to make your voices heard. And even if you are a Republican, you need to make your voices heard, because if you let people win by cheating and create this one-party system and this one-party state, what you've done takes us all the way back to where I started here. And that's that once you take away the ability for a peaceful transfer of power from one group of people to another, you not only take away the ability of individuals to feel like they can affect their government, and therefore that they need to buy into their government, you also affect the leadership that says, oh boy, I can't ever let go of power, because if I do, somebody's coming for me. And that is an extraordinarily dangerous situation. You can think of a number of states where this has happened. So one of the things going forward is going to be to focus on the states and on the local levels, and make sure those great majorities, because I hear this all the time, well, I'm scared there's only a few of me. Literally, more than 80% of us want common sense gun safety legislation. This is not a minority. More than 65% want abortion rights. That's not a minority. And you could go down all the things that are on the table right now. A majority do not want a radical group of evangelicals and billionaires to be forcing their laws down our throats. We just don't want that. And in this moment, what we are seeing is one other. Oh, let me finish with the states. The flip side of stopping the real harshness of one party systems in the states is that states also can be laboratories of democracy. And that is exactly where we got the progressive era, in a moment that looked very much like this. When the robber barons had taken over the national government, people turned to the states, especially the state of Wisconsin. And in Wisconsin, people there worked together with the Farmer Labor Party, the Democrats, and the Republicans as well, to create a system that did the best it could for the people who lived in the state of Wisconsin. It was called the Wisconsin Experiment, and it brought together business, government, and scholars, deliberately brought them all together to look at different issues and say, hey, this is really how we help agriculture. Hey, this is really how we help transportation. This is really how we help unwed mothers. They work together in that state to create a progressive system that then Theodore Roosevelt picked up and enacted in the progressive era in the United States at the national level. Now, one of the pieces of that, though, I wanted to go to was that one of the important things about not freaking out and about building this progress in the states is the media. And I have been extraordinarily loath ever to criticize the media because it's a hard job, and I am not a journalist. That's one of the reasons I can do what I do. I am not a journalist. A journalist tells you breaking news, and with luck, a little bit of context. That's not what I do. I'm a historian, so I look for patterns in society, and that means that I don't tell you all the news. I tell you the things that look to me like they change society. And I didn't want to forget two things. And in this moment, it certainly looks as if the legacy media has signed on to the Donald Trump administration. And that's fine if they are actually reporting the news, but it appears anyway at this point that they are not. They are skewing the news in such a way that it makes that administration look good and not actually reporting what's really happening. And what we have seen lately, like with the era of Theodore Roosevelt, we have seen the rise of independent media happen in that period as well, that is reality-based. That doesn't mean they are politically the same, voting the same way you are, whether you're a Republican, an independent, or a Democrat here. It means they're telling you what's happening. And sometimes they're telling you their spin on it, which is fine. You have to recognize that you may not agree with Sarah Longwell when she's writing for the Bulwark, but she's smart, and she's telling you what's happening, and she's telling you what she thinks about it. You don't have to agree with her, but you have to care that she is based in reality. And I would urge you to seek out media that is based in reality, not only at the national level, but also at the state level. And if it's not there, start some. I started Letters from an American on Facebook, simply saying, hey, here's a report I just read, and here's why I think it matters. You can do the same thing even at the local level. Hey, did you see there's a new bond issue coming up to replace the school? Here's the pros, here's the cons. You don't have to take a position on it, but you can say this is reality-based. And when you do that, you are performing a service for the idea of democracy. The other thing that jumps out to me in a systemic way today, an important way today, is we are seeing something that I have not seen really since the 1920s. And that is that we are seeing the consolidation, the visible consolidation of extraordinarily wealthy people to take over our government. And that's always been there. It's been there since it's always been there in our history, but in our era, it's been there since the New Deal began, what economists call the Great Compression, where wealth and income starts to compress. It's been there really since that period. It's 1937 when people, big business Republicans and desegregation Democrats and traditionalists who want women not to have equal rights to men come together. They come together in 37 to push back against the New Deal and that Great Compression and the civil rights that are embedded within it. But after the 1950s, they always couched that in cultural terms. Whenever some people looked around and said, wait a minute, this is just like trickle down, like we used to see that gave the robber barons all the money, they'd say, no, it's about Black Americans, and that's not the words they used, taking over your tax dollars because they don't want to work. Or, oh no, it's about women who want abortions. Or, oh no, it's about immigrants. Or, oh no, it's about critical race theory. Or, oh no, it's about diversity, equity, and inclusion. Or, oh no, it's about trans kids playing sports. For me, the assassination or the murder, or it's not an alleged murder, the murder of Brian Thompson, the chief executive officer of United Healthcare, and the reaction to that, in which so many people defended the murderer, says to me that class fight in America has broken wide open. And Trump has deliberately tied himself to the billionaires. This says to me, yet again, we have a systemic instability in our system that offers all kinds of new possibilities. So with all of those systemic pieces in front of us that spell not only incredible instability in the people who are coming in, remember they also have just squeaky clean or squeaky majorities in the House and the Senate, which means that the Democrats have they're only in a squeaky little minority, very, very tight there. And Trump did not win a majority of the American voters. What this says to me is that Trump is projecting, and his people are projecting, we are strong men, we're going to do all this, we got everything. The reality is that that's an advertisement designed to make you feel that you can't do anything. The reality is the United States of America under the incoming administration is going to be very unstable. But within that instability, there is a majority of Americans, and a strong majority, not a squeaky majority, a strong majority of people who care about democracy, who care about following the rules, who care about the peaceful transfer of power. And by that, I don't just mean people like you and me. I mean leaders in this system want to know that they can walk away from their jobs without their lives being on the line. This is a system that protects everybody and that has worked incredibly well in doing that for 248 years. It's never been perfect. Believe me, we need to make a lot of adjustments to it. But that extraordinary, innovative system that says you don't have to be loyal to the king. You can be the loyal opposition. And that doesn't just protect you, that protects the king. That system is one that we are going to have to try to protect and reclaim going forward. And one of the things that I would really urge people to do is, I talk about politics because I love the system, and I talk about history because I love history. That's what makes me happy. Yesterday, I took the whole day for myself, and you know what I did? I wrote a draft of a chapter of a new book because that's what I like to do. But you don't have to love this stuff the way I do at all. Changing the way we think about democracy is not just about how we vote. It's about how we act. It's about supporting your community. It's about bringing your best to the table. It's about, if your genius is photography, do it. And do it really well, because in a democracy, you are inspired and allowed to be the best that you can be, to determine your own future. If that means you've always wanted to learn to speak Spanish, by God, do it, because that says you have agency over your life. If you're a gardener, do that and do it with pride and do it with joy, because the other piece of what we're doing is getting rid of that 1980s Gordon Gekko, what makes America great is individuals. That has never been true. That has never been true. What has always made America able to thrive is communities. Even the cowboys were not the real American West. They were workers for the rich guys. The real American West were the places where communities worked together to raise barns when they caught on fire, which they all did, or to make sure that people could survive tornadoes or blizzards. That community base, the same thing that enabled people to win the Civil War or to push back against the robber barons during the Progressive Era, or to turn to art and literature to push back against that same impulse of individualism in the 1920s, or to enable the entire world society that stood against fascism to win. And that was not just the people in the trenches. That was the women who were working as Rosie the Riveters, and that was the fact that indigenous Americans volunteered for that war, as they have for all wars since the Spanish-American War, volunteered at higher rates per their male demographic than any other group in America. That was everybody working together because they believed in the concept of human self-determination. And that means, as I say, not simply looking at the news and freaking out, which I would urge you not to do. It means bringing your A game to whatever it is that gives you joy and whatever it is you do well, and learning new things and meeting new people. Because one of the major things that anybody who studies authoritarianism will tell you is that authoritarianism can rise only when people hate and when they despair. And we're in no place to hate or despair anything in this moment, except those who are trying to take away our democracy, who are trying to take away our rights, and who are trying to take away our history of being able to determine our own futures. You know, Americans are good people, and most people around the world are good people. Meet them, get to know them, get to do what you do best, you know. Bring joy to it, make community, meet new people, as I say. And by doing that, even if it means you look away from the political news, you are contributing to the reinforcement of the community and creativity that has actually, throughout our history, made America great. So I don't know about you. I'm going to go out. It's a beautiful sunny day. I'm going to take a walk. Thank you for being here.